Hello, welcome to my video, and we're going to see the clash between the leading players in the Tata Steel after 8 rounds. We're going to see the clash between Magnus Carlsen and Shakhriyar Mamedyarov. We had one d4, and once again we have something called the Catalan opening. It seems like Daniil Dubu has influenced Carlsen to play more of this. Maybe he had plenty of ideas for Magnus. And once again, the opponent plays dc4 against Carlsen, like in the round 6 against Rapport. Rapport also took on c4, and we have again the open Catalan, bishop g2, but now instead of knight c6, black went for bishop b4 check first. Magnus goes bishop d2, and the whole point of bishop b4 check is to put the bishop on a slightly awkward place, which is d2. And now he doesn't capture or go back to e7, he goes a5. He tries to provoke capturing on b4 and somehow to get this knight more passive. It's also possible to capture, but Magnus goes for castle, black castles, and now e3 first. Before he goes to e5 with the knight, he wants to protect the d4 pawn, so he plays e3 now. And now rook a6. And you might think, what is this awkward move? What is rook a6, actually? But rook a6 has a purpose. It's actually played against knight e5, which would lead to b5, I believe. With the rook on a8, b5 is not possible. Potentially play c6, rook b6, in case white breaks the pawn structure like this. Tries to break at least. And, for example, if this happens, to have something like rook b6 in the future. But let's go back here. Instead of knight e5, Magnus played queen c2. He attacks the c4 pawn, and now the response of Mamedyarov is very natural. He plays b5. The response of Magnus is natural as well. a4, trying to break the queenside pawns. Now black tries to keep the composure of these pawns by pushing c6, protecting b5, and now knight c3. Additionally, putting some pressure on the b5 pawn. If black took on c3, it would lead to very dubious position, because both answers seem really good for white. Both bishop c3 or bc3. Black gave up his bishop, his dark square bishop. White could play something like e4, e5, gain some space, kick the knight from the f6, which is in some way defending this king side. And the position would not be so pleasant. So he tries to keep tension here by rook b6. And now anyways, Magnus plays e4. Tries to kick this knight from f6, which is, like I said before, a very good defensive piece. Bishop now goes back to e7, and now a move like b4 is a really good option for black. So white has to react fast. And he goes e5 immediately. Because if white allows b4, he will allow also bishop a6, and the c4 pawn will be hardly captured. And even if it gets captured, it will take a lot of time, and black will consolidate until then. So white does something concrete in this situation, and now black goes knight d5, very natural. What does white do here? If he captures immediately on d5 and does this, I think that it's not as good as what happened in the game, because now after b4 the position is quite blocked and the d4 pawn might become a big target. Let's say if bishop b6, queen b6, there are no open files, and that's the problem for white. Black has a fairly easy game here. Knight c6, he can block always with bishop a6, and white's only idea to play for some advantages to move the knight and play f4, f5 to try to break on the king side. It's not so easy to do that. The d4 pawn is always a potential weakness, and it's not easy to keep an eye on this pawn having the knight moved from f3. It's not so easy to do that, because you need to move the knight from f3 to, let's say, e1, and then the d4 pawn becomes more vulnerable to attacks. So Magnus tries the other way. He tries to capture first on b5, because now if you capture on b5 and do this, bishop a5, now at least there is an open file on the a file, and that's the biggest difference between the two positions. But let's go back a bit. Magnus took on b5, and now Mamedyarov took on b5 back with the pawn, which wasn't such a good decision. It was better to first play knight b4, some kind of in-between move, which doesn't allow white to capture the exchange. And for example, if queen e4 happens, then just capture on b5, and yes, white captures on a5, but after knight d5, black will go bishop b7 next and have a quite good game, especially having in mind that he's a pawn up on the queen side, which might be useful in some ending or maybe even now in the middle game. The b5 pawn is currently not touchable because after, let's say, rook b5, there is knight c3 and the rook hangs on b5, and if knight b5, then there is knight c6. If the knight moves back to, let's say, a3, there is always this unpleasant c3, because capturing on a5 doesn't really bring much to black, because bishop a5 and you're getting back the material, and that doesn't get you anywhere. So with this very elegant move c3, black is just winning some material, because the bishop on d2 is under attack, the rook is already under attack, but now the bishop's diagonal is covered, so it's white who is lost. But in the game, what happened was that Mamedyarov took on b5 like this, and now Magnus took on d5, and now we have some version of the position we saw in this case. Knight d5, c d5, bishop a5, but in this case the a file is not open, which suits black more. But let's go back to the game. After this, okay, queen d5 is not good because of knight g5, threatening two things: queen h7 checkmate, or bishop takes d5, taking the queen. Mamedyarov has to capture on d5 like this, and now bishop a5. White is going to capture the material, he's going to capture the exchange, but still there are some difficulties after this. He tried to seize the a file by rook a8. Of course, white's position is now better because he's material up, and also he has the control over the only open file. But also, white has a problem how to defend the d-pawn, how to involve other pieces without losing the d-pawn. I think this was the critical moment in the game. In this position, Mamedyarov played h6. He lost some time on this move. He needed to play something like bishop e6, keeping the pressure on d4, not allowing white to capture the a file so easily. Because you'll see what happened when black lost some time with h6 and allowed white to stabilize. If he played bishop e6, then in case of rook fa1 to just keep the control over a file, there is knight d4. And black is winning this very, very important d-pawn. And let's say in case of exchanging bishop f8, now the queen goes back to c5, and with next d4, d3 maybe even, he's even getting some counterplay in the center with these pawns. And I think the best way to play here was to just capture on f8 immediately, and after bishop f8, you either defend this pawn, but after b4 it's not clear how white can continue this. And also, if we mention some concrete line, let's say knight g5, there is always g6, and now the d4 pawn is under some pressure. If he takes, then nothing, just take back on e6, and the d4 is next. So that was the best way to fight for equality for black, bishop e6, and putting pressure on d4. What's more important is that black doesn't allow what he allowed in the game. What he allowed in the game after h6 is that now white gets an easy control over d file. And now if you take on d4, there is capture, and rook d1. Now bishop takes d5 is next move, and this position is much, much better for white, because now the position is much more open. These rooks can fulfill their potential. Bishop e6, now the best chance for black in this position, defending d5, which is also very important, and also keeping pressure on d4. But now Magnus plays a very nice move. He plays queen d1. Why is that move played? First of all, you have to defend the d4 pawn. You might ask, why not queen d2? What's wrong with queen d2 in this position? Well, in that case, black can capture and go king h7. This move feels a bit clumsy here, because you would like to get your queen to d1 and a1 to somehow control the a file. In this case, it's not possible because you need so much time to get that. Queen d1, queen a1, and even in that case, you lose on d4 and the position becomes really unpleasant. So it's better just to play immediately this, queen d1, and now the difference is that if you capture, king h7, there is a move h4, which you didn't have in the previous line, because, let's go back. If you go here, captures, king h7, and now h4, with the idea of h5 and giving some check, provoking g6 and opening up the king side, now black has a very nice move, knight a7. All of a sudden this rook on a8 is trapped. It's not something that white wants in this case. Black will just chase this rook with queen b7. Let's say I play king h2 and you play queen b7 as black, rook e8, queen d7, and back and forth. Just repeat moves. But after queen d1, you cannot do the same like this, and after h4 to go knight a7, because you allow queen a1. And you can go back, of course, but there is the queen a6. Very nice move, and it's a tough spot for black. So that's why queen d1 is played. Like I mentioned before, if you take king h7 after h4, white wants to go h5 and queen b1 check to somehow open up this king. Mamedyarov didn't like that idea to exchange rooks immediately, and he went b4. He's trying to maybe create some passed pawn to create enough counterplay to equalize, but now Magnus reacts with b3, striking against those pawns, and now the threat is taking on c4 and forking bishop and the knight on c6. Mamedyarov decides here to play c3. Black creates a passed pawn, which is nice for him, but could he do something else? For example, if I mentioned before that the threat was bc, dc, and d5. So let's try something like queen b5, protecting this d5 square. But still, white has this move. And in case of dc, then there's knight h4, renewing this threat of d5. And in case of bishop d5, there is knight f5, and with queen g4, I think that those two pawns are just too slow. They cannot do much. And after knight h4, if black takes on h4, there is d5. And I think this position is dead lost now. What happened in the game is that black played c3. Something that white wants in this position is to get knight to e1 and c2. But the issue currently is that both knight and queen are attacking on d4. So you don't have time for knight e1 because the d4 pawn is going to be captured, so you have to find a way to kick some of these pieces away, either the knight from c6 or the queen from b6. So Magnus chose to play rook from a8 to a6, kicking this queen from this diagonal, allowing himself to play knight e1, knight c2. So black goes back to c7 and now knight e1. Time to get back to c2 or d3. The first plan was to go to c2 and maybe to e3 to put pressure on the d5 pawn. And here Mamedyarov understandably doesn't want to sit and wait for Magnus to improve his pieces and to slowly win the game by knight c2, knight e3. He played f6. The reason why he played this is because he wanted to open up the position and maybe to target the d4 pawn, which is quite vulnerable in this case. The most vulnerable pawn in white's position. He was expecting something like ef6, bishop f6, and putting some pressure on the pawn on d4. Something like this was his dream scenario. After king h8, bishop f5, and somehow to muddy the waters. After f6, instead of capturing on f6, Magnus decides to go knight d3, heading towards f4. Now it's not possible to capture on d4 because of, I'd say, rook e6. And after this, bishop d5. I think that works, because if black somehow defends this knight on e6, there is knight f4. This cannot work for black. let's say queen b6, knight f4, and next move you capture on e6. Even if you do this, bishop e6 and knight g6 comes next. If you go king h7, there is a check on d3 and knight g6 on the next move. So already it's a very, very unpleasant position for black. Already lost position. And now black took on e5, but Magnus takes with the knight. And now if the knight goes back to d8, there's always this idea with rook e6, but I think here it's much more precise to just go knight g6. And if rook f7 to just play queen e2. Put some pressure on both bishops. Also, if the bishop moves from f5, there is rook a7. Very unpleasant, hitting the bishop the third time. And that's why in this position Mamedyarov played knight e5. He took the knight, but after rook e6, now the d5 pawn is weak. He's going to be captured on the next move by the bishop. If the knight goes back to c6, then there's bishop d5, and the threats are numerous, like rook e7, capturing the knight. In this position, Mamedyarov tried something desperately and he played c2, but after a simple queen e1, moving away from the action, Mamedyarov resigned. And the reason why he resigned is that when the knight moves, let's say, to c6, there is bishop d5, and again, as in the previous line, there are plenty of threats. Rook e7, rook c6, lots of threats. If queen d7, rook d6, just winning the queen on the next move, or at least winning the knight on c6. If he tries knight d3 to support his c-pawn into promoting, there is rook e7. There's just no good way to end this game. If queen c6, there is queen e3. And let's say if you queen, I take. If knight captures, then there's queen e5. Hitting on d5 and g7 at the same time, which is unbearable for black. He can go queen g6, but after bishop d5, bishop e4 next, it's just unattainable position for black. Also, if they exchange queens, like this, bishop d5, and after, let's say, king h8, there's bishop c4, caging this knight on c1, and the endgame with 2 pawns up is, I would say, pretty easy to convert. After queen e1, Mamedyarov resigned, like I told, and after 9 rounds, Carlsen is a sole leader in the tournament with 6.5 points. Giri is the second one with 6 points, having 4 wins in a row. That's pretty impressive. That's it. I hope you found this video instructive. See you soon and bye bye.